All right. Now, in this tutorial, I want to help you to get organized and to start working on your paper to actually convert it from the notes that maybe you took following my other tutorials advice and get it into a manuscript form, an actual document form. So I'm going to turn up my microphone just a little bit. I hope I don't redline really hard on you, but I think my last one was kind of quiet. So hopefully this is better. I'm doing something that I don't know if I would do if I was actually working on a manuscript, but I just sort of wanted you to see what I was working on. So I went ahead and made the running head and the page number in place. I have ported over the actual title of the manuscript that I wrote. I usually don't write my titles until I've actually written the manuscript, because I don't know what the title should be until I've written the paper. I don't know what the paper is really going to be about until I've written the paper. And so you're going to find that also, that if you come in with too solid of an idea of what the paper should be, you're going to have a lot of difficulty finding articles that will allow you to write the paper. You're either going to make the mistake of displaying confirmation bias, where you only search for those articles that support what you pre-existingly believed, or you're going to be really super frustrated that you can't find any articles because nobody has done exactly what you're thinking about. So what I recommend that you do is let the literature guide your topic. Now, I came into this particular topic that you're seeing on the screen with a little bit of a bias, because I was on a committee where we were trying to develop best practices for online learning, and the other members of the committee were solidly, at least everybody who was willing to speak, talked about how every class has got to have a discussion board, or else students will feel alienated, or they will feel like they can't really learn, or other kinds of things, because without an online discussion, they're not going to have that kind of connection. And I had at that time been teaching online for probably 15 years. And I was like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like my students really enjoy a discussion group as a whole. Some students love it. Some students don't. Most students, it seems like, don't. And that was like the biggest complaint I got, was having to do discussion boards. So I had a motivation that was not pure of heart when I started this study that I reported. I wanted to find out, is it true that all students like having contact with their classmates in an online class? So I began my reading. And, you have a small set of articles that you need to read for your assignment. I, of course, need to read sort of the whole spectrum of all things having to do even tangentially with the topic, so that I'm up to speed and I know what I'm going to design my study about and things like that. So I was just sort of reading. Anything that had to do with online learning, anything that had to do with like online learning and personality. I was reading anything having to do with that. And online learning and satisfaction was the overall overarching goal, was what factors went into satisfaction with online learning. And so, and you've got to remember, I was doing this in 2014. So this is, kind of at the beginning of a lot of people doing online classes and stuff like that. So as I was doing all of my reading, certain themes started to emerge. I was taking those notes on my cards, and I was sort of periodically sorting them and trying to figure out what was hanging together. And one of the things that I noticed very consistently was, and this was true for the committee that I was on also, the instructor's role. What does the instructor contribute that allows a student to be satisfied with the class or not? So instructor's role was one big factor that kept emerging in the conversation of all these articles I was reading. Another factor that I was really interested in was personality of the student. Does the student's personality help to determine whether they're satisfied in an online format or not? And then another factor that I had to deal with was what is satisfaction? What one student might be looking for and say, yeah, that was a good class, might be very different from what another student's looking for and what they would characterize as a good class. Like some people would say it was a good class if they ended up with the grade that they wanted. Others would say it was a good class if they learned something unexpected, or if they felt good when they got done. Like there's different things that a person might characterize as satisfaction. So there were more kinds of themes, but I'll just stop here because I want to make it kind of analogous to what you might be doing. And, you've got a relatively short paper to write. And so you'll have, maybe 2 or 3 themes that you're going to be addressing in your paper. So just to get, now you'll notice I didn't make an outline. I didn't get all formal and put my Roman numerals in here and things like that. I just sort of wrote three major themes I want to make sure I cover. And maybe I'm going to take a break now. Maybe I feel like I've sorted through all my cards. It gave me this flash of insight of these three things. And I'm going to go, take a walk, or I'm going to have a snack, or maybe it's nighttime and I'm going to go to bed. I don't know, but I'm going to deal with this in a little bit. So now maybe I'm going to come back, and now I look at it and I'm like, okay, now maybe I want to move these around. Maybe I want to try and reorganize this information so that it's maybe gives a better story. So maybe I'm going to say, you know what, why did I put what is satisfaction at the end? Like, shouldn't I start with that, since like the title of my paper starts with satisfaction? This clearly is my main theme. Shouldn't I start with what is satisfaction? And maybe we could argue that everything else is a subset of that overall theme. Like, what is satisfaction? And then I'm really like, how does the instructor contribute to satisfaction? How does the personality of the student contribute to satisfaction? So yeah, I think satisfaction should probably go at the top. And then maybe I'm going to start populating that with different researchers' definitions. So maybe I'm going to go, definition 1, and I would actually write what that is. I wouldn't write definition 1, and then I would get the citation for it. And I would put it right here. And so I don't have to think about it again. And then maybe there's another definition, maybe there are competing definitions of what satisfaction is. And so I'm going to go ahead and, put that here. And, if I have a citation for it, I'll put that here. So I'm just kind of keeping track of everything as I'm going. I'm not having any ideas that I write down and then I have to go back later and figure out where I got that idea from. I just write it down and I give the citation right now. And then maybe under instructor's role, maybe I'm going to look at things like, general feedback. Maybe I'm going to look at specific feedback, things that maybe you only give directly to one student about their exact work, general feedback. Oh, everybody did a great job on their papers this week, as an email or an announcement. Specific feedback. Your paper had these advantages and these disadvantages, and here's where you could improve, or these are things that I really liked, or, what I mean by specific feedback. And then maybe under instructor's role, we could include things like organization of the class, right? How did the instructor organize the class? How did they structure the assignments? How did they present those to the students so that it was, intuitive or not intuitive, things like that. And so on. So see how I'm starting to populate each of these topics with a little bit more specificity. Maybe there's certain studies that have, looked at general feedback. Maybe there's certain studies that have looked at specific feedback, and so on. And I'll give my citations right here. And then maybe I come back after another break where I'm like letting this all kind of merge in my brain and figure out where I'm trying to go with this. Maybe I'm going to talk a little bit more about specific feedback. And maybe I found some studies that look at the role of positive versus negative feedback. Is it more important that you're saying, good job? Or is it more important that you're saying, okay, these are the things that you need to change, right? Like which is better? Which one of those contributes to satisfaction more? Do students feel better and like the class more if they were encouraged throughout, or did they like it more if they were given constructive feedback that allowed them to ultimately grow and develop? I don't know. Like, I would look at positive versus negative, and maybe I have studies that looked at the role of positive, and maybe I have different studies that looked at the role of negative feedback. And so maybe I want to make sure I'm putting those citations in here as I go along, so I don't forget who said what and things like that. Maybe under specific feedback, I might have found studies that talked about, like what we call formative feedback, where it's like, maybe I give assignments, I give you some feedback, and then you go back and work on it some more. And then I give you another assignment, and then I give you feedback and you work on it some more. And then at the end, you have a cumulative study. So maybe specific feedback, under that, I would have this issue of, do I give just isolated assignments and they aren't tied together, versus these are formative assignments and I give feedback. I'm just throwing things out here that could possibly go under these different headers that maybe I had read articles that would support. And so you can start to see where I'm populating this so-called outline without a lot of structure, but I'm just kind of trying to get stuff together. And again, I might look at it and go, you know what? I think I'm going to reorganize some of this because I think it'll flow better if I actually do general feedback after I've talked about specific feedback. So maybe I'll go ahead and move that. You can kind of, in this in this way, figure out what would make the best flow to tell the story of the different studies that you've read. So having it organized like this will make it a lot easier to now, once I'm done, let's say I've got everything done. Let's say I've populated my personality, the student component, and I'm all like, I know what I want to say. I've kind of got it organized and what looks like a good way to organize it. Now I actually start filling in the sentences. I, delete out these little things and substitute in paragraphs, right? That's actually addressing all of these things. So this strategy allows you to do it a little bit more step by step rather than having just a giant blank page that you have to just start writing. Like this will allow you to just start getting some ideas on here and start organizing them like that. So that's my piece of advice, especially if you have something bigger to write. I mean, I'm characterizing your paper assignment as relatively brief because we're comparing it to, let me look at my manuscript. This one has 34 pages. So, when you're writing a full manuscript, yeah, they're pretty long and that's a lot and you really better get organized. Yours is a little briefer. And so, you may not feel like you have to impose so much organization on it. But what I'm hoping this will inspire you to do is to look at things as like little bites rather than the giant process of writing a paper. I'm just going to write the main themes. Okay, under one of the main themes, I'm going to start talking about some specific studies that support or, contribute to that theme, right? Just all I'm going to do is populate one of them today, and if you do it in little bits, it'll be a lot less punishing. And then the last thing I'll tell you about this is that I had a student last quarter who was following this process and she had filled in the citations and she had really described the studies that but she had just done it all in outline format. She hadn't done like the last little bit where she had really written a paragraph, tied things together in her own words. She hadn't gotten to that part, but she had like a really well populated outline. And when it was time to finally turn in the paper, and, I nag for the last week before the paper is due, I will remind you, hey, it's due in a week. Hey, it's due this week. Hey, it's due today. So she was getting all these emails and was feeling awful that she didn't have her paper due. And she knew that if she didn't turn in something, she probably was going to end up having to repeat the entire class. And so she went ahead and turned in the outline that she had completed so far. And I have to tell you what, following my rubric where I ask, is the flow logical, right? Like that's one big criterion. Did you describe the studies? Let's see, what are the other ones? Readability is one of them. That she lost a lot of points on readability, right? Because it wasn't a paper, it was an outline. She lost some points on describing the studies because there was like bare bones description. There wasn't a thorough description. So she lost some points on the rubric, but she ended up just by applying the rubric. I don't do any kind of like subjective, oh my gosh, this is an outline, so right off you're starting off with a horrible score. I'm like, I apply the rubric. And she ended up with at least a B plus. I can't remember. She ended up with at least a B plus, which ensured that she didn't have to repeat that class just because of missing this paper. You miss this paper and it's really, really unlikely that you're going to get a C or better in this class. And so she ended up passing the class because she turned in a well-organized outline. She just had not completed the actual paper part. So that's my encouragement for why this might be worth your while. Worst case scenario, she had something to turn in. So that's my last little tip for why this strategy might be super helpful. So, all right, in the next tutorial, I'll talk about how to do citations and references.